Dead Writings Reborn. Just as a Buddhist destroys his intricate mandala sculpted out of sand, or how the caterpillar destroys its cocoon to be born as butterfly, I did away with all of our old videos. But I did want to summarize all we've said in the past year or so through this video, showing how 1 all equals 1 equals none, 2 noting the importance of getting outside, alien, other, nomad, stranger, Kent's transcendental manon or vice Kelling's immanent unconscious, and 3 how that drives man toward a form of becoming other through death and rebirth, all of which is tied to our fate or cosmic destiny, inscribed in the stars. As noted in Taoism, yin becomes yang when each reaches their extreme, becoming the other. As Yukhui noted, the cosmotechnical relates the cosmos to the Tao and the I Ching, by which man might escape through a line of flight to the outside, becoming other through extremity. The occultist, through astrology, Trit, or Kabbalah, attempts to predict the future so as to anticipate and thus change their cosmic fate or destiny, escaping the life ordered for them, becoming weird, since weird stems from the word weird, meaning fate, connected to the Norns and weird sisters. It also is connected in Old English to werean, which means to become. Tied to the cosmos, and thus the stars, man seeks escape from predetermined fate or destiny, unaccepting a stoic or cosmopolitan life. The concept of change or revolution is linked to the revolution or revolving of the stars themselves. And change and revolution leads to becoming other. We see this connection to cosmic weird fiction via Lovecraft and Nick Land. As noted in Walter Benjamin's theses on the philosophy of history, religion and theology remains inseparable from philosophy. Marx's historical materialism is akin to the mechanical Turk puppet who plays chess, commandeered by a small dwarf that sits inside and seen, symbolic of theology as it is unseen or hidden from the onlooker's eye. Paul Klee's Angelus Novus turns away from the future. The very notion of progress for the future becomes catastrophically inclined. Jacob Taubes noted the Gnostic inclination of all revolutionary rebels who saw themselves as alienated aliens, taking on the role of the Antichrist or Promethean man, the Luciferian lightbringer, which the Golden Dawn linked to enlightenment and illumination, in order to incite change against established order. The Gnostic thus seeks to immanentize the transcendental and thus immanentize the eschaton, as Jacob Taubes noted, and which Eric Voegelin warned against. The Gnostic is thus the rebel or Promethean Antichrist in this sense, liberating man through illumination or gnosis, escaping from the deceit of the demiurge, who has chained spiritual man to the material plane. To go beyond taboos and not be organized by any psychoanalytic forms of repression, embracing schizomaniacal flow and desire so as to be transformed alchemically into something other, is chimerical, akin to the body horror element we often see conveyed in Lovecraft, akin to the people of Innsmouth. We note this body horror element in movies like Videodrome by Cronenberg, where the character shouts, "Long live the new flesh." Much like the mantra, "The king is dead, long live the king," the old ends up being replaced by the new, akin to the killing of the divine king, as noted in Fraser's The Golden Bough, linked to Diane of the Wood. Like an alchemic chimera, a new compound is assembled from old elements, appearing monstrous and uncanny. Thus it is by getting outside, as the alien or strangers or wanderer, etc., that aids one in becoming other, an outsider who is alienated. The egg or body without organs is the transformative process in Deleuzian philosophy. Being unborn is an important concept in film associated with the bornless ritual. The unborn child of Crowley, as mentioned in Moonchild, is what black and white magicians fight over. The unborn child is essentially that which has not yet a body, linked to the Deleuzian virtuality of potentiality. It is essentially what can but has not yet come into being. It is a transformative force, and thus all things are shaped by the liminal will from the outside, by which we can see through representation, as Schopenhauer noted, immanently on earth. Lucifer is the Gnostic lightbringer, of course. Devils, to Crowley, don't exist, as they represent a demiurgic dyad and not the monad or one, created by members of the Black Lodge, as noted in Moonchild. Venus represents Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Remember, the Greek called Venus Lucifer. And so the connection to illumination through Lucifer and love is linked to one's will. By connecting with the outside, one travels on or adventures on, tied to fantasy and thus fantasia, the inner mind. This is the essence of lifelong learning in life. As Gabriel Caterin brought up in Pleromatica, like the ignorant schoolmaster, Jacques Rancière, the teacher does not teach, rather, They allow students to learn even to the point that they will learn things even the teacher does not know, allowing the outside to open up. Cateran cites St. Paul in the second epistle to the Thessalonians and brings up the concept of the catechon, which keeps the Antichrist from coming. The Promptian figure is the Antichrist who sets himself up in God's temple. And, again, we discussed the catechon in relation to Jacob Taubes, Carl Schmitt and Giorgio Agamben with reference to the state of exception. Even Curtis Yarvin's Butterfly Revolution notes how, through the dismantling and death of democracy, a new autocratic system is being reborn from out the cocoon or egg of becoming akin to the metamorphosis of the butterfly. Techpros like Peter Thiel see Yarvin as their house philosopher. But whether democracy's death produces a Pelromatic paradise, or, instead, a hellscape of freedom cities or micronations, is anyone's guess. Either way, the state of exception is antithetical to the eschaton, allowing the catechon to delay revelation, acting as an organized body. Bataille, in the psychological structure of fascism, noted how fascism was a political party that was successfully able to seduce the masses and working class. One does this by focusing on the heterogeneous aspects, i.e., people's base desires and passions. This included fusing the military with various religious iconography as well. With MAGA, we can see this with the rise of Christian nationalism as proposed in Project 2025, as well as the scapegoating of illegals and the woke agenda. Thus, the masses rally around this collective identity of identicality, driving out the scapegoat or any others who dissent by way of difference, i.e., the alienated other or outsider, the very person and alien who seeks Gnosis itself. It is a catechonic construct that prevents eschatological annihilation, and thus death and rebirth. To Gabriel Cateran, the Mater or Mother, like the Virgin Mary or Holy Mother, self-produces through autopoiesis a third new term from her own ambivalent state, finite and infinite. This is akin to Deleuze's difference and repetition, or the body without organs. The pharmacon is ambivalent and keeps the dichotomy of opposites like finite and infinite alive both above and below, as an alchemist might say, or equal parts yin and yang. Derridean deconstruction, through ambivalence, produces endless pluralities, but, unlike Deleuze, keeps itself confined to textual interpretation, never getting outside enough to see transcendental nonsense, i.e., outside sense perception. Here, via ontology, man has been left to retro-reality, as Mark Fisher noted, unable to escape and find linear flight forward. To land, the only escape out is to become the inhuman other, adhering to Lyotard's libidinal economy, fueled by Bataille's ruinous passions. The Augustinian idea to love and do what thou wilt, which inspired Crowley's Thelemic, is important when considering Augustine's notion of how time is an eternal present for infinite God as opposed to finite men who sees them as past, present, and future. Rebirth/resurrection through the BWO or egg, which is also a symbol of the soul, is an act of becoming other, relying upon an immanent outsideness, i.e., pulling from Cateran's infinite phenomenondelic solution that engenders all finite matter/mother, capable of self-producing, i.e., self-revelation, a new third term from the prior two, i.e., forming a Trinitarianism as noted in Christianity, Buddhism's Trikaya, and Hinduism's Trimurti, or in the triptych of Lacanian psychoanalysis. Cateran cites Viveros de Castro, linking his concept of cannibalism to an anti-colonial act done by indigenous natives and aboriginals so as to devour the other and incorporate it into themselves for transformative purposes. The devouring alchemic father in the Book of Lamp Spring is an image I tend to use for this notion of devouring the child, who is the third term from the two, used for transmutation or transfiguration. Thus one is all and all is one, as the alchemists tend to state, where multiplicities or pluralities equate to monisms. As we brought up with Cateran, the finite is not to be merged with the infinite, since doing so would expel finitude itself. Thus, the interplay between these two terms births a third term into creation, the child from the Mater. In Deleuzian terms, this is done through difference and repetition, or the BWO. Again, all goes back to the egg to be reborn or resurrected. The eggs we color at Easter are reminders of rebirth, coded red to mimic the blood of Christ. In alchemy, the red bird or phoenix rises from out its own ashes. All the colors of the rainbow stem from one white light, the refraction of light in a prism, the Luciferian light of illumination akin to Promethean fire. All pluralisms equate to monism via Deleuze. It is this emptiness by which one obtains sunyata in the Zen Buddhist sense. Through emptiness, one becomes all and transcends, which I often like to refer to as N1, which equates emptiness or nothingness to oneness and allness, or everything. According to McGregor Mathers, conx and pax means light in extension. This is often associated, again, most simplistically for visual representation, with the prism, where one white light produces all the colors of the rainbow. Thus, as the alchemists say, all is one and one is all. Gnosis is the unification of one back to the monad in Neoplatonic or Gnostic terms. Thus, the alienated and fallen man essentially mimics the nous or mind of reason, which is linked to the demiurge, and obtains gnosis or knowledge, in order to return home. Remember, the demiurge is linked to rationality and consciousness itself, as he was the entity that created material existence. He is the sculptor of existence that is cut off from the eternal essence and, thus, traps man to the material plane. Essence itself is thus linked to potentiality and power, as it is essence from which all existence emanated via the Platonic forms, which are perfect and abstract. The Greek term dynamis/dynamis means potentiality and power. Dynamis is thus linked to the monad's essence. To Plotinus, it is the demiurgical mind or nous that organized dynamis into physical reality. Like in Plato's forms, essence sculpts existence. Mind comes to shape matter. Potentiality sculpts actuality akin to Deleuze's virtual. In many traditionalist forms of thought as posed by Aldous Huxley in the perennial philosophy, for example, the immanent mind is often correlated to God in this sense. The vibrating pneuma breathe/spirit sculpts the word logos, tied to fantasia, the inner mind, and thus fantasy as well as ghost. The Gnostic takes man down Hegel's road of history, as Vogelin and Taubes noted, where man either immanentizes the eschaton, Vogelin, or abducts the outside, as Negarestani would say, where we play like the demiurge and construct alchemically through toy philosophy. Like a physicist breaking down equations and reassembling them into new ones, or a chemist merging separate elements into new compounds, or a philosopher taking disjointed ideas and reassembling them to construct new concepts, or a child playing with separate Lego pieces to construct new creations through play, we all become Gnostically inclined creators. With potentiality sculpting actuality via dynamis, Deleuze and Land again come to the forefront via virtual potentiality. Nietzsche's will to power, when applied in Deleuzian terms of transformation or how to actualize the will, where power is linked to dynamis, connects to an alchemic and transformative process, a type of thaumaturgy. But when we incorporate the Kantian menon, which cannot be known, much like the monad or pleroma, we can begin dealing with theurgy or conjuring from the outside in order to sculpt physical reality, where the will is represented by Schopenhauer. Remember, to the group Odinon, Hyperstition is linked to summoning demons in reference to the lemur demons in Land's numogram model. Thaumaturgy is the craft of wonder-working, using occult or esoteric forms of knowledge or gnosis to achieve the tangible end result. Truly, like Daedalus' own invention, when one sails too close to the sun, they are prepared for a fall. Like the Tower of Babel and the thunder words of Joyce's Wake, Ragnarok comes, tied to Wagner's Ring and Nietzsche's transvaluation of all values from Twilight of the Idols, philosophizing with Thor's hammer. Similarly, from Wagner comes Tolkien's Ring of Power, where the ring is the machine, which corrupts man through its technical form of magic, focused on Eleulian efficiency. The alchemic man heads down the post-Kantian path of Gnosis, heralding in Hegel's history and the immanent absolute, just as Taubes and Vogelin noted. Thelemic is caught within the alchemic circle and eco-cyclic history, ending where he begins, rising and falling like an immortal phoenix, back from hell or Hades, the land of the dead, like Ulysses. Like David Foster Wallace noted, all is entertainment, but we are unable, as Joyce noted in The Wake, to see the waters in which we are around. Thus the need to be alienated or cast outside so as to understand. Thus, getting outside becomes important. The eschaton chapter of Infinite Jest is a nod to Alfred Korzybski, where we are not to confuse the map with the territory, the representation for the thing in itself. Robert Anton Wilson would later be heavily influenced by Korzybski in terms of interpretation, where we don't even realize we're making an interpretation, viewing our interpretations as truth. This led to Raw's concept of a reality tunnel, where we interpret things to be true through symbolic perspective. Him and Timothy Leary would also develop their 8-circuit model of consciousness, which would inspire the anime serial Experiments Lane. In postmodern terms, it is this sense of simulacrum via bodydrillard of symbology and semiotics that outweighs the real, which, in Lacanian terms, cannot ever be linguistically conveyed. All remains to an imaginary realm. This concept of the desert of the real akin to the map not being the territory comes from Jorge Borges' story on exactitude in science, where an empire makes a map that is the same size of the actual empire itself. Like Joyce's Ulysses, the common everyday man is to be reborn like Odysseus, coming back home from Hades. The Eleusinian mysteries, which are based upon Persephone being taken by Hades into the underworld, later returning from hell itself, denote death and rebirth and immortality akin to the philosopher's stone or the phoenix. Alfred Jarry, the great pataphysician of the science of imaginary solutions, was one of the first hyperstitionally inclined characters to turn fictions into facts, where virtual potentiality could emerge from the limited confines of rational science, getting us outside. Bergsonian narration understood through intuition inspired Delves as well. And Bergson was Samuel Little MacGregor Mather's brother-in-law, tied to occult magic and the Golden Dawn. It was MacGregor Mathers, Henry Bergson's brother-in-law, who incorporated John Dee and Edward Kelly's work into the practices of the Golden Dawn. As a fun fact, it was also Lovecraft who credited John Dee as the translator of his Necronomicon itself, and we understand Nick Land's connection to Lovecraft through the horror story of the Fanged Mina turning us into it, making us become other or alien. Bergson's philosophical ideas have been used and adapted to fit in with a model that focuses on demonic summoning in the hyperstitional sense, which is something he found nonsensical and unimpressed with his sister and brother-in-law's magic. Bergson influenced elves, who influenced Land, who relies upon demonic summoning from the transcendental outside. In social systems, people are not taught to become other, but to conform and assimilate to the status quo so as to maintain order, to maintain the Catechan or Stoic and cosmopolitan lifestyle, unable to be reborn so as to escape fate. Society shapes the citizen rather than the citizens shaping the society or the student shaping the school like John Dewey wished they would. People will conform and assimilate to find social acceptance, often idolizing after elites they are told to envision themselves after, as C. Wright Mills noted. Furthermore, no longer in disciplinary societies, Deleuzian control societies have blown away any form of contextual escape. With the bars of our prisons extended out toward infinity, man cannot escape his incarcerating confines and all becomes blurred into one homogeneous haze. Tracked and monitored by technology which the people desire and pay for, no longer punished to be kept under control, we live in a world where companies call themselves families. Culp's Dark Delves reigns supreme, integrating all into the rhizomatic network. It is also noteworthy that Delves was a big fan of Lewis Carroll, enjoying his nonsensical language, as Delves preferred diagrams in his own philosophy over the dialectic, considering language to be an oppressive regime of signs and symbols, hence his and Land's disdain for Hegel. Crowley, too, was a fan of Lewis Carroll along with John Lennon from the Beatles, as noted in songs like I Am the Walrus. Carroll's nonsense is a sign of transcendence, being, like a headless person, outside of sense perception. As such, since it cannot be conveyed, it produces a paradox. Hence the book lies being Crowley's title, since truth cannot be conveyed, since truth is paradoxical in nature, just as Kierkegaard noted, requiring a leap of faith. We must remember that surrealism was highly influenced by alchemic and occult imagery, tied as well to transcending language and symbolic expression itself, as noted with both Rimbaud and Bataille. The barnless ritual in Thelemic, as noted in the Lesser Key of Solomon by Crowley, and the Greek magical papyri, links to the barnless and headless one Ketu or Asaphael come to mind. It is barnless, since it is linked to the outside, i.e., transcendentally beyond life or death, and not yet made manifest. The astral body of one's guardian angel, the guides, is associated with Idolin, reflection, and the term egg and dawn. Egg as in becoming other, and dawn as in a new dawning day. The guardian angel is tied to the genius, which is a technical term in Roman mythology and could be seen or represented as a daemon. The genius is thus the divine nature or spark within each person. In Christian terms, it was St. Augustine who associated this form of genius with the human soul. In the Gnostic sense, we also know that it is this light or soul that allows one to remember through anamnesis their divine origins, attaining gnosis and the ability to return to their pleromatic paradise. As Christ noted pertaining to the Eucharist at the Last Supper, Do this in memory of me, Gnostically interpreted as anamnesis or remembrance, linked to gnosis, remembering our divine origins in the pleroma, toward a spiritual as opposed to material life. This is often why the soul is associated with the egg. With the egg, we can also note the connection to Dells and the body without organs. The idol refers to Idolin, which is the ghostly body or spiritual apparition, i.e., the ghostly copy or reflection of a person, linked also to the word fantasia, inner mind, tied to phantom or fantasy. The spirit or soul, as we discussed in Greek and Gnostic terms, is associated with the pneuma or breath of a person, as it is breath that gives us all life. Note: you cannot make words without breath. Reflection can also be associated with introspection, i.e., looking inward through self-reflection. Thus, the importance of yoga linked to the word yoke, meaning to join, and various breathing techniques and forms of meditation. In psychological terms, we can see this in the Jungian sense of amalgamating opposites, enema and animus, as well as the shadow, in order to merge the unconscious aspects of ourselves with the conscious through individuation, arriving at the true self, or in Crowley's terms, uncovering one's true will. To Crowley, it is this body of light that is akin to the egg. This is why Crowley, in the Book of Lies, links success to the sucking of eggs. 23 Skidoo means to get out or to get outside. Even the Beherit, which is a Syriac word for Satan, in Cantaromir's manga Berserk, is given the appearance of an egg, used as a key to open up the gateway to the Godhen's abyss. Dali, in his surrealist art, was fond of using eggs as a mean of conveying this birth, as noted specifically in his work Geopoliticus, Child Watching the Birth of the New Man. The eggshell, the prior world, must be destroyed in order to be born. As Amy Ireland noted in Cute Accelerationism, it is a form of escape that, like the soul which is tied to the egg and astral body, man astrally projects out through the BWO or the egg. Zygmunt Bauman noted, in Liquid Modernity or Late Capitalism, the caravanserai or inns or hotels, we stay at our temporary places that allow us to endlessly explore nomadically, connecting us rhizomatically and allowing for smooth lines of flight to the outside. Again, the nomad or wanderer or traveler or stranger is this outsider. In Bataille's story of the eye, eggs are inserted into Simone's various orifices. Eggs are linked to both testicles and eyeballs in the book. Simone even tries to suck out the narrator's eyes at one point. Again, the eyes and eggs are linked to the soul. Traditionally, Easter eggs were dyed red so as to symbolize the blood of Christ, linked to the phoenix as well as resurrection, where, through death, one is reborn akin to Christ. To Nick Land, it will be through Bataille's ruinous desires due to the excess of the sun and the accursed share that leads man to the Negredo stage, the black sun, of putrefaction, allowing him to die so as to be reborn. Remember, Babalan is identified with Mother Earth in film the Mot-Eater/Mother, as noted by Catherine, since Mother is Latin for mother, that births from out the egg of alchemic becoming. And Babalan's mating companion is chaos, for it is chaos that precedes all creation. Chaos is also linked to land, to deterritorialization, and thus Bergsonian duration and Deleuzian difference and entropy. The 13th major arcana is death, which does not mean actual death, but a turning over of a new leaf, being reborn. As we've discussed in prior videos, mystical deals with the mystic, the mist or fog of St. Patrick's breastplate, for example, or the Fifth Fiata, which is a spell to hide or conceal, often called the Deer's Cry, dealing with the transcendental outside and thus the mystery, or hidden or unknown manila and outside of sense perception. If you look up the etymology of mystic, you will find that it relates to closing the eyes or lips, as well as being an initiate. And we associated the initiate to things like the Eleusinian mysteries, tied to death and rebirth, as well as the word mystery meaning mystical. In film there is the abyss, which is the void separating the material world from the divine, guarded by the Kelly's demon, Crimson. If one can cross this abyss, they can obtain enlightenment akin to the gnosis needed to reunite with the divine through henosis. To do this, one must rely upon their guardian angel, which we brought up in a prior video on the bornless ritual, correlated to the genius and the soul or divine spark or egg. After crossing the abyss, one can access the city of pyramids, represented by Bina, where the whore of Babalan resides. Babalan is the mother and thus related to matter, as we brought up with Gabriel Cateran's notion of mater, which is Latin for mother, linked to self-revelation, the great big sea and womb of all, the mother archetype. Through Babylon, one pours their blood, their ego and identity, into her holy grail, giving it up to her and joining the blood of prior saints who have also crossed this abyss and nod to revelation, uniting one's personal will with the divine will, unifying with the divine, akin, again, to henosis, leading to enlightenment and higher states of consciousness. In psychological terms, we can equate this abyss with encountering the shadow of the unconscious and making it conscious through individuation, realizing the true self as it were in Jungian terms. We can also see this shattering of the self or ego death with the loss of identity, where one learns, alchemically, that they are tied to the all. The rose cross of the Rosicrucian order is also reflective of this, where the flower blooms as we become aware of our unconscious. Similarly, we must remember that Pan, the Greek faun, is correlated to all as well as nature. What is known as the night of Pan or Nox is the state associated with ego death itself. Death and nothingness, creating out of nothing or virtuality, is needed for all to exist akin to the Christian creation myth. The night is thus that which occurs before the dawn, which is associated with rebirth, i.e., the dawning of a new day, i.e., the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn, where we possess a new self, symbolic of the rising sun, enlightened by Luciferian light as Lucifer is the morning/dawning star. In short, night brings about death, but like all death, births a new being, a new day, into creation. Death is associated with chaos, but also the void, i.e., the nothing or the zero. Nox basically reduces to the number 210 for Crowley, as noted in the Book of Lies. 2 represents duality, 1 represents unity, and 0 represents nothingness or emptiness, negation or negativity. Thus, we see the union between one, none, and all, or, as I like to say, in one, with the N in parentheses, symbolic of the death card. As Land notes in The Thirst for Annihilation, all conclusions led to zero, i.e., chaos, entropy, or death, since it is through this zero that all comes into being. All is thus reduced to a state of becoming, a state of rebirth, connected to the mysteries of the unknown and outside, where all is one and none. This nothingness relates to Buddhist notions like Enso or Sunyata, as well as the Taoist Taiji model. Also note, Cronzon 333 equals 9, a significant number to Taoists for completion, as well as Nick Land for getting outside via hyperstitional time travel, since he adhered to an Augustinian notion of time. Schopenhauer and Heidegger were both heavily influenced by Buddhism. Okakurakoku, who's known for his Book of Tea, was a big influence on Heidegger specifically. To say ein, or a state of a being, must be destroyed or deconstructed in the Derridean sense, to get us back to a state of sein, or being in itself. This would lead to Jacques Derrida's deconstruction, whereby, relying upon the ambivalence of the pharmacan, meaning poison and cure, would produce endless meta-narrative or a plurality of interpretations. For Heidegger, das Nichts, the nothing, is an important aspect, since not being allows being to exist. Again, this is a very Buddhist idea, tied to Sunyata as well as yin and yang. In Taoist terms, we could relate this to the Taoist Taiji model. It was Zhu Dunyi who merged Taoist teachings with Confucian ideas and the I Ching to create this model. The Tao, in the form of Chinese alchemy, also allows for the emergence of the 10,000 things as they pass through the Wuji, the emptiness or state of non-being, the Taiji, the dualism of yin ampersand yang between all things, and the Wuxing, the 5 elements in Chinese alchemy: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, which then give rise to the 10,000 things, which represents all things in reality. All is thus transmuted alchemically from this initial state of non-being or Wuji. The idea of nothingness would later influence Sartre as well, with his book Being Ampersand Nothingness, a play on Heidegger's Being Ampersand Time, where he splits being in itself, our non-conscious being that we cannot fully know, with being for itself, our conscious being, where nothingness creates a relation or juxtaposition between things, i.e., a no thing or nothing, by which things can be compared through either lack or desire itself. To Schopenhauer, complete willlessness was the key to salvation. Thus, it is through the negation of the individual will that leads to salvation, where, in the Buddhist sense, desire remains the source of all suffering. Asceticism is a primary way to deny the individual will as well. To Schopenhauer, death is the purpose of life. All things die. And, yet, death is not the ultimate end, i.e., it is not true annihilation. Death is but a way for man to deny his individual will, upon which, after death, an underlying will lives on, linked, again, to salvation. Like Christ or Lazarus, the divine king has risen from the dead. Long live the king, reborn and made anew. linked to fantasia and fairy stories to Tolkien through the resurrection. And while many people see this alchemic transmutation as obtaining the philosopher's stone, the grand panacea that perfects all things, the funny thing about the etymology of utopia is that it basically means not place or nowhere. It is emptiness itself, the nothing or zero. In other words, utopias are but fantasies, fantasia, linked to the imagination as well as phantom or fantasy, that don't really exist in reality. The notion of wabi-sabi or the perfection in imperfection comes to mind when speaking of immanent matter, a paradox of linguistic expression. We have noted how, with Crowley, magical summonings as noted in the Lesser Key of Solomon, are done with the intent of bringing up facts from the subconscious. Jung would later expand upon this notion, linking archetypes and symbols to the unconscious, which was to be integrated with the conscious through his individuation process so as to form the self, relying heavily upon alchemic imagery and a Gnostic framework. As we brought up in our serial experiment Lane series, this is how Lane becomes a god. Before one can be reborn, one must die, akin to the phoenix rising from out its own ashes, or joy system Finnegan or Finn McCool, linked to the Finn cycle. We have already noted Jung's links to the occult through both alchemy and Gnosticism. And, indeed, his psychological system outside of certain psychoanalytic ideas matches many occult concepts, e.g., in Antiodromia, where, when things reach their extreme, they turn into their other, which is a Taoist idea, linked to the I Ching, or metanoia, which means changing one's mind, which is done by breaking one's self down, literally dissolving away or melting down like a caterpillar in the cocoon before it is birthed out as a butterfly. This meltdown is, again, akin to a death of sorts, and is done so one can be reborn, bringing about metamorphosis or change, i.e., a change in one's destiny or fate, liberating one's self in the Gnostic sense from a demiurgic deity. Even the notion of Land's meltdown stems from Deleuze's notion of becoming other by way of the egg, which we link to the soul, tied, again, to Crowley, or the BWOS, producing pluralities and multiplicities, the all, from the one or none, tied to the zero, which, again, is akin to the Buddhist Enso and the Knight of Pen or the Tritzfuel Arcana, where we start out, again, on a new path in life's endless adventure or journey where the sun is behind us, having been reborn and knowing where we have been, where wisdom, the Sophia for philosophers, cannot be fully known, tied to the transcendental Keter or crown. Alan Watts once noted that contemplating death was a morbid thing that people in Western cultures didn't really like to do. But he compared his ponderings on death to manure, something unpleasant but fertile, and something from which all life can grow. There is no life without death after all. As noted in the Principia Discordia, flowers essentially grow from such bullshit. Like a hermaphrodite who is Hermes and Aphrodite's child, one has the reproductive forces of both sexes, above and below, creating their own endless series of offspring. Remember that Mercury is Hermes and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, is Venus, as well as Lucifer through the Roman Phosphorus, meaning light bringer, who is linked to Giorgione, to Prometheus. It is the child Hermaphroditus, that is the third term, akin to how the Earth is the third planet, which comes after Mercury and Venus, that is born from the prior two beings. We can also relate this self-production to the Holy Mother Mary or Babylon, as Catherine does. Frater Chod's work, The Chalice of Ecstasy, the Holy Chalice, links to the Tree of Life in Kabbalah, comprising the first, second, third, sixth, ninth, and 10th Sephirot, tied, again, to the tree whereby the 22 pathways on the Sephirot correlate to the major arcana, which, when added to the 10 Sephirot spheres, produce the 32 paths to wisdom, the path of snake and flaming sword. Like the drama of Parzival, in true knightly and chivalrous manner, one seeks the grail for spiritual enlightenment, led on by love. Parzival is joined by Sir Gawain in search of the grail in Arthurian fashion. Parsifal would later be adapted by Richard Wagner as well. All is thus tied to ecstasy, linked, through henosis, to the one. It is by such merry adventures, after all, that one gets outside, so 23 skidoo, connected to fantasy and thus the inner mind, and fairies. Getting outside, one is transcendentally connected to the Druid's Oak or Venus, land of the fairies, through the TANNH user gate. In the introduction of Macbeth by K. Dayton, we can note the Weird Sisters' connection to the Norns, and, thus, the idea of destiny and fate linked to fairydom, prophecy, and necromancy, as well as the Greek goddess, Hecate, who, much like the Norns and Weird Sisters, is represented by the Trinity. Hecate, of course, was the goddess of magic, tied to the crossroads or the doorways, which tied together the border between life and death. Just as doors are entrances and exits, this liminal experience links life with death as well as unconscious with conscious, if speaking imminently. As Jung stated, like the fall of man, consciousness comes to man as a curse, having eaten from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Thus, the golden dawn of illumination, linked to the fall of man, is a necessary and painful process. We quest, forever filled with an unanswerable question, linked to that which is alien or queer. Queer is to seek. Seeking is also the start to all adventure, tied to fantasy and works of fiction. Etymologically, the word fantasy stems from fantasia, meaning imagination, tied to the inner sense of the mind. When criticizing Hegel and German idealism, it was Kierkegaard who noted that pure thought is a phantasm, since not everything can be captured within reason and rationale. Because of this, to Kierkegaard, one was forced, therefore, to interact with the world. The best fantasy stories, after all, take on a form of adventure, dealing with the outside, i.e., the quest where we encounter what is queer. This phantasm thus controls the spoken word, tied to the mind as well as the breath or pneuma, or spirit, or soul, linked to language and logos. Magic is seen as a precursor to psychology as noted by Ion Petriculianu. And despite how modern-day men tend to shun fantasy as being childish, there is good reason as to why people like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis saw it as the true underlying reality to our very being. As Matthew notes, one must be childlike to enter heaven. C.S. Lewis himself even noted how being a man meant not being afraid to embrace this sense of childishness. Separate from technical sorcery and Morgoth's ring of magic, it is this form of artistic enchantment that is found in the realm of the fantastical fairies, which we connected with Crowley in terms of Venusberg and Tannh user, bringing about, to Tolkien, the eucatastrophe or good catastrophe. The fairy tale exists in an eternal realm, which never has an end, tied to Christ's resurrection and thus death and rebirth and many of the mystery cults thematically. To Michael End, we can call this a never-ending story of sorts, where, in Fantasia, the character Bastian gives the childlike empress the name Moonchild to save her and her kingdom. We have talked about the Moonchild in relation to Crowley and his own Thelemic system. Either way, the realm of fantasy is a place where one is outside of time, as it were beyond the veil of Isis, tackling mystic mysteries. We could relate this timelessness to time travel as Nick Land does, if we wish. To Plato, the human head is the microcosm of the cosmos. The heart is the seat of emotions. It would be the Stoics who would associate virtues with purity of the heart, however. Furthermore, purification could occur through theurgy, which we previously discussed in relation to thaumaturgy. The white magic of theurgy would later be practiced by Iamblichus and the Neoplatonists, used to unify a person back to the one or monad. The use of hearts is key symbolism in games like Persona 5 or Metaphor. Refantasio tied to fantasy, for example. Jung tied the waters to the unconscious to the waters of baptism, helping one be reborn as it were in the Christian sense. Baptism is seen as a way of exploring the unconscious, encountering the shadow, so as to be alchemically transmuted. As Land notes in Shamanic Nietzsche, everything the tale says seems to come from Christianity, where evil is linked to the heart of erotic love, eros, which is one of four kinds of love in the Greek sense. This explains Land's acceptance of not eros, but of thanatos or death. Even Christ's crucifixion, which we have often equated with a limited experience, to Land, is trivial compared to the torture of being God, as existence itself becomes desecrated or non-sacred. Thus, the sacred can be preserved through sacrifice or nihilistic annihilation, a return to zero or nothing, nihility, which, to Land, can now be seen as a divine way of thinking, where God is dead. This is the god of death, or Batails Solaranus, the black and alchemic son of occultation and eclipse, the Negredo stage of putrefaction. Through death and decay, something new, however, can always be reborn. However, God and the Nihilo are not as separate in the Christian sense as Land makes them seem. Like Alpha and Omega, God is both the beginning and end, the thing from which all returns to one. And, thus, we get the link between all and one through the logos or the word. To Ariugena, God remains unknowable to men, his angels, and even himself. One and all, God thus has no opposite or other. From the logos linked to the Platonic forms, stems all matter or materiality, which is illusory. Here, we can see same Gnostic undertones stemming from such a Neoplatonic perspective. Since God created from nothing ex nihilo, This nothing, to Ariugena, is God himself. Linked to Numu or breath is thus the spirit or soul, tied to language and the word, and thus things like poetry and song. To land, this poetry is hideous. As Rimbaud noted, poetry becomes impossible as it attempts to access the outside, unable to break beyond the barrier, unable to accurately convey true transcendental eternity. Rimbaud, we must remember, was part of the symbolist movement, which was highly influenced by occult and esoteric ways of thinking. Rimbaud's alchemy of the word, for example, or the hidden or occulted meaning to be found in symbolic works, or the links to the unconscious as we brought up with Crowley, are but a few examples. Poetry is immoral to Rimbaud just as literature is evil to Bataille. Poetry is a transgression because it attempts to capture that which transcendentally cannot be expressed. In prior videos, we have made links between fantasia, inner mind / fantasy / ghost, and pneuma, breath or spirit, linking the head to the heart. To Franco Berardi, capitalism has put a stranglehold upon the species, choking us out and preventing us from finding our flow or rhythm due to a sense of suffocation, whereby we have lost our breath. Thus a need to regain our breath as a species. Poetry is thus tied to transgression done by deranging the senses via alcohol like absinthe or other drug-induced states and leading a decadent lifestyle. This shamanic derangement of the senses thus 1. Produces linguistic nonsense, i.e., outside rational sense, as well as seeming absurd or surreal, which is why Bataille wrote in a surreal way. He was a member of the surrealist movement before getting booted out by André Breton, and 2. Gets the visionary outside of sense perception, allowing him to engage briefly with the Kantian Manon and seeing a glimpse of what is behind the veil of Isis herself. Again, this is a tortuous process, akin to the fires and flames of damnation. Like as we noted with spinal catastrophism, pain is a necessary part of the process, linked to pleasure. However, with Barker's hell-bound heart, ambivalently beset, where via Bataille's accursed share or ruinous passions, we are delighted to death, burning in the abyss so as to be reborn as something other, leading to land, to an inhuman techno-capital takeover, of course. We must remember that, to Bataille, utilitarianism turns men into tools if not outright machines, thus the need to go beyond it. Thanks to the excess of the sun through the accursed share, men must squander, i.e., waste this excess through self-indulgence, decadence, eroticism, or sacrifice, etc. The reason Bataille's language is surreal is because it shows the fundamental limitations of language, much in the manner Rimbaud showed, proving poetry was impossible. This limit experience, as noted well in films like Hellraiser, blurs the lines between pleasure and pain, where each is found in the other when we approach the utmost extremes. As Crowley noted, there is pleasure to be found in putrefaction from Tannhauser. At such extremes, we transcend our experiences, approaching the inexpressible. Bataille was known for having hung a portrait of a person dying by Lingchi in his office, which he would look at daily to remind him of this. Akin to getting outside is shamanism. Wicca is seen by Scott Cunningham as a shamanic religion, using chants and meditation instead of other means like drugs, to obtain altered states of consciousness, allowing communion with the male god, who is often represented as the horned god, associated with the sun and the wild, and the goddess represented by fertility, and thus the moon, the triple goddess of the maiden, mother, and crone, akin to the white goddess of Robert Graves. We have discussed goddesses like Hecate, Diana, and Isis before, who would all be a favorable fit as well into the Wicca world, as noted by thinkers like Raymond Buckland or Gerald Gardner. It is this passion of ruinous intensities, as noted in the Acts of Gilles de Rais, whom Bataille wrote on, where sacrifice is linked to the sacred, that will transform the human being into something other via Delves' body without organs, leading to a smooth line of flight, reaching a limit experience via Bataille, and getting outside, led on by Kant's Manilwil, which infects us vampirically through its bite, morphing immanent man into it. Man becomes inhuman, escaping human order and organization, and inexpressible beyond words, akin to a Lovecraftian creature, where language is lost. This transcendental alien outsider who is alienated is, thus, above the law, acting as the true will of the world, which, to land, takes on the form of techno-capital, since capitalism is synonymous with AI, to land, which calls to us via virtual hyperstitional time travel, where fictions become facts from the future, akin to a CDHULHUIAN calling. The stigma or outcast is he who deviates from a dominant ideology, which is linked, as we know, to the dominant modes of discourse, embedded in signs and symbols and semiotics. As Goffman would note, a stigmatized person is he who is often discredited and outcast by the system itself, alienated, isolated, and discredited, where stigma derives from the word dot or mark. And, thus, a stigmatized person is a marked man, as it were, generally leading a life of psychoanalytic repression so as to find social acceptance. That, or be outcast as a pariah. Howard S. Becker's Outsiders also comes to mind. Tedels and Guattari capitalist eros refers to the desire that is embedded within the capitalist structure, controlling how desire operates, which, in turn, ends up sculpting people subjectively, turning them into consumers of commodities, where desire itself is produced or manufactured. By controlling people's desires, capitalism can thus ensure it reproduces itself and ensures its own survival. The term chaosmosis, of course, comes from James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake and is noted as a zone of indistinction, the chaosmos of Al. Chaosmos is combination of the word chaos and cosmos. According to Finn Fordham in Lots of Fun at Finnegan's Wake, this acts as an inverse to divine creation itself, life into chaos, as opposed to chaos into life. We should note that chaos, etymologically, means void or abyss. This is the ex nihilo creation out of nothing, of God. While modern-day usage of the term chaos means disorder, it is based off of the Greek notion of the void or abyss. Such chaos is dividual as opposed to individual, in the Deleuzian sense favoring difference as opposed to identity. This satanic wake thus allows for the act of becoming other, or transmutation or transformation or alchemic transfiguration, by way of writing. Like Rimbaud's Alchemy of the Word from A Season in Hell notes, at last, I began to consider my mind's disorder a sacred thing. This damnation or fire of the mind is the fire of consciousness itself, linked to the fall of man, as noted by Jung, whereby all psychic problems emerge. We could also link this fire to promphois and thinkers like Giorgiani, whereby transaccidentation occurs, linked to transubstantiation. Substance, as in transubstantiation, deals with the inner essence of a thing, while accidents are deemed the superficial and observable qualities of sense perception. Transubstantiation deals with Christ transforming bread and wine into his body and blood. Christ is thus actually in the Eucharist, not just symbolically. Even though it cannot be detected by the senses, it still looks like wine and bread, and thus the accidents remain the same. Through Eucharist, one obtains Gnostic omniscience. Idolon, as we brought up, means an image, a reflection, or ghost or phantom, and would link to fantasia, and thus fantasy, as well as the word and breath or spirit. We can also link this idolon with the body of light or astral body or algoides. Remember, as we brought up with Crowley, the algoides is connected to the holy guardian angel, tied to Crowley, to the egg or the genius, and thus the daemon or daemon, as well as the orphic egg, the cosmic egg of chaotic potentiality. And so, we see the connection to Deleuzian virtual potentiality as well as the body without organs, the egg of becoming. Now, Deleuze was no fan of signs, and even in A Thousand Plateaus talks about how they can form a regime of oppressive organization, preferring the potentiality in the works of Lewis Carroll. Remember, desire is tied to virtual potentiality and thus predates the individual or verbalization. Thus, we see the subjectivity of semiotics itself seen more from a post-structuralist perspective. As we noted before with capitalist eros, capitalism controls how desire operates, influencing people subjectively. Thus, the need to embrace taboo or outcast desires schizophrenically, which the systems forces you to psychoanalytically repress, so as to become other and transform one's self, reproducing ourselves through desire and autopoiesis, deterritorialized and then reterritorialized into a new organism, becoming reborn through our breath. Altering the flows of desire are thus necessary if we are to escape capitalism's stranglehold upon us, choking us unconscious and driving us towards our death. Gaining back our breath, as Defoe notes, is of primary importance, using a cosmic spasm to shake off those asphyxiating fascists, in the Deleuzian sense, who cannot create from nothing, i.e., from chaos. Man is to rely upon a transcendental or else immanent outside or his unconscious, which, like alchemic fire, brings forth from death a new phoenix. Like the Finn cycle, or Tim Finnegan, men rise like Christ from the tomb, resurrected or else reborn as something other, connected closer to the outside or infinite by our finite experiences on earth as mortal men and women working within the finite limits of the world. One can either be asphyxiated by fascists or breath with chaos itself, shaking off those who would steal you of your breath for becoming reborn. This relates to Chong Tzu's man who dreamt of being a butterfly, unaware if he was a man who dreamt he was a butterfly or a butterfly who dreamt he was a man. We see the link between alchemic transmutation with the act of becoming other, tied to virtual potentiality. This is also noted in the Anime Ghost in the Shell, where the Major loses her identity to merge with the puppet master so as to become other and transcend her limited being. By altering the flows of desire, we can alter the libidinal economy and, perhaps in accelerative terms, accelerate it towards its own end, evolving it towards its own death and demise. In the show Neon Genesis Evangelion, the Magi supercomputer system sets the 11th angel, Hyrael, which functions akin to a virus, on an evolutionary path to its own extinction. Either way, desire can be one, repressed psychoanalytically to maintain the dominant ideological norm, or two, embraced schizoanalytically so as to change the system itself and liberate ourselves from it. This change in the flow of desire allows for flux and flow and change to occur in the social system itself. As we noted in Cute Accelerationism, Amy is very much aligned with Land's understanding of the tale and how, through the accursed share, man pursues ruinous pleasures of putrefaction. She is also willing to see how technology has sculpted desire subjectively into something outside of what Watari or even humanity wanted, i.e., into cute and kawaii anime culture that leads toward capitalistic infantilism +ECTHULHU. Techno-capital, the Fanged Mina, calls to us from the future, as Land notes, turning us into it through transcendental insight and Marx's dead labor or automation. As Amy notes, infantilism and anime are only on the incline. She notes that Watari is being weighed down by a form of psychoanalytic repression himself by not embracing this kawaii culture, seeing it as but pollution. Watari, to Amy, thus is suffering from some kind of psychoanalytic neurosis or complex of some kind. Etymologically, Catholic comes from the Greek notion of through the whole, which means worldwide, or universal, or the all, as it were if we think alchemically. The word worldwide becomes important if we think of the World Wide Web as invented by Tim Berners-Lee, and the internet linked to Lane's weird world of the wired. Marshall McLuhan was highly influenced by Joyce and the Wake. To McLuhan, our environments are not alien enough to us. As such, we tend not to see things that we should. It could be staring us right in the face, but we remain oblivious to it. Like David Foster Wallace, who commented on internet culture and entertainment, noted with the parable of the fish that is unaware of what water is, the very thing we are swimming around in or surrounded by eludes us. What Joyce did was make Dubliners aware of their world by alienating them with all of his words. Thus, by alienating people with his chaotic words, he made them more aware of the cosmic world in which they were around. Chaosmos, as we said in this video, tied to Guattari's notion of chaosmosis, is a combination of chaos and cosmos, the chaosmos of Al. With all words tied to the breath pneuma of our very being, we can use our words to re-sculpt our society connected to fantasia or fictions, which can become facts. We correlated this to the ogoids and the thelemic egg of becoming, which we also correlated to Dells's body without organs. McLuhan took Joyce's 10 thunder words for technology. Technology, of course, is our current environment, sculpting how and what we come to see, how we perceive. But like the fish in water, we are unaware of our surroundings. Like the fish, we are breathing and taking in oxygen from such waters without realizing it. Thus, it is controlling our breath pneuma or spirit, where, as we brought up with Defoe, it is choking us out, forcing us to lose our flow. Joyce uses William James's stream of consciousness style so as to find a sense of flow. To James, flow is more important than separate and disjointed ideals, which he symbolized by a river or stream, hence why Joyce uses the river analogy so much, which can be connected as well to Huck Finn since he shares the same name as Finn from the Fenian cycle Finmacul, which correlates to a cyclic form of history like Vico. We can relate this sense of flow to Dells's idea of difference as well if we wanted, which acts as an antithesis to identity or identicality. On the internet, information similarly flows rhizomatically, where all is connected, leaving us all entertained, fed on junk food, as DFW noted, killing us, making us slaves to capitalism. With man becoming more alienated from his environment, he is starting to actually understand a bit more of the actual surroundings in which he is around, much like how Lane is the alien or in the anime show Serial Experiments Lane, obtaining the true Jungian self. Again, we link the Neoplatonic and Gnostic idea of alienation to the Christian alien god via Hans Jonas and heresy as noted by Gershom Scholem, where man seeks to return to the pleroma after experiencing his fall from grace. It is this very fall that makes up the thunder words in the wake, tied, again, to Babel, linked to delves to the regime of signs as well as nomadic movement or lines of flight to the outside. As we brought up before, the alien is the alienated outsider or the stranger, the nomadic wanderer or stranger in a strange land, Gershom, the exile. Like Christians, they rebel against the cosmopolitan lifestyle where the cosmos is tied to the polis or city-state. Unlike Homer's Odyssey of Heroes, Joyce showed in Ulysses that everyday or common people like Leopold Bloom are the true heroes of their own stories, sculpting and shaping the world. It is the common man and woman who are to shine as stars Crowley, becoming gods unto themselves. Instead of stoically embracing the fate or destiny of the stars, occultists would use fortune-telling or astrology to predict the future and change their fate, having their fate in their own hands. This is also noted in the 22 major Drit, which, when tied to the 10 Sephirot spheres in Kabbalism, create the 32 paths to wisdom. Babel and thunder represent the first two thunder words in the wake. The third thunder word meant to clap, as noted in a thunderclap. A thunderclap is what wakes somebody up. We have discussed how the notion of being awoken or awakening is associated with Gnosis itself, much like how Neo is told to wake up in the Matrix by Trinity, both names having obvious Christian and Neoplatonic connections. Neo equals one, or as noted in the first episode of the anime Ergo Proxy. Others have linked the phoenix to Joyce's use of the Phoenician hypothesis as a literary device, where civilizations are reborn in different forms, transmuted almost alchemically. The seventh thunder word dealt with Humpty Dumpty, who comes from the work of Lewis Carroll, and whom we have made connections with to both Dells's and Land's writings and able to be put back together again, a master of words, but not of numbers to Land. The eighth thunder word deals with Daddy, which is a reference to the traditional song Whiskey in the Jar, made famous by the Dubliners. Whack-fall my daddy-o is a nonsensical phrase used in the song itself. But the song relates to whiskey, and thus, again, the waters of life, the alchemic panacea, which spills on Finn at the wake, bringing him back from the dead. The ninth word in the wake is the character Sean, coughing. Shem and Sean are the two sons of HCE. Shem is the artist, the writer, while Sean is your sort of everyday or ordinary man. Thus, it is Sean's coughing where he coughs in different languages, losing the flow of his breath, leading to Babel tied, again, to Babel's tower. Once he clears his throat, Sean speaks the 10th and final thunder word, which brings about the eschaton in the form of Ragnarok, where the Norse gods are essentially doomed once Thor's thunder falls. We have noted the importance of the Ragnarok myth, linked to Wagner's Ring, which inspired J.R.R. Tolkien, as well as Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols, philosophizing with Thor's hammer and leading to the transvaluation of all values. To Karl Barth, man and God cannot communicate directly, citing the infinite qualitative distinction of Kierkegaard. Liberal theologians who speak of God, really, then, only speak of themselves from an anthropocentric viewpoint. Feuerbach, who would influence thinkers like Max Stirner as well as Marx and Engels due to his idea of social alienation, as well as people like Max Weber and Emil Durkheim, to name a few, noted in the essence of Christianity that God is just man speaking about himself. Barth would agree that when man speaks of God, he only speaks of himself, where, to Feuerbach, God is an idyllic image of man, socially constructed by imagination. Since God transcends understanding, any time men speak of God, they are merely speaking of man. To Barth, since man cannot know God, God must make himself known to men, as was done by Christ making himself immanent as a man. Thus Christ is the revealer, the revelation, and the revealed, link back to the Logos, Father, Son, and Spirit. Like the four alchemic elements earth, air, fire, and water, or the four faces of God, lion, ox, man, and eagle, the four Gospels Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John signify the importance of childishness. Mark 10:15 specifically, finding our way back to the transcendental fairy folk found by Tolkien through the resurrection of Christ, and for Crowley through Venusberg linked to Frey and Love and the TANNH user gate. Sunday sun, Monday equals moon, Tuesday equals Tyr, Wednesday equals Woden/Odin, Thursday equals Thor, Friday equals Freya, Saturday equals Saturn/Kronos. 7 is an important alchemic number, linked to the 4 elements and 3 primes and the number of stages needed for sculpting the Philosopher's Stone. Past 7 comes the eternal 8. And past the 8 comes the Taoist 9, spiraling off somewhere strange getting outside. The subjective and relative nature of time in terms of duration through intuition caused Bergson to debate Einstein, influencing delves in the form of film, where technology in the form of techness, Heidegger noted, has a way of revealing things to us. Akin to Christ, it is the revealer who reveals and delivers revelation. Like Christly Gnosis, technology, too, seemingly gets us outside. And yet still there is a relativity of time in terms of simultaneity, which, like Derridean deconstruction, ends up producing pluralities and multiplicities. Time becomes most important when dealing with death and rebirth and the act of becoming other, finding a way to get outside, as Land noted on his nomogram rhizomatic tree of life, borrowing from Augustine the idea of an eternal present, linked to our very lives, where the finite past, present, and future accesses the infinite outside an eternal present, so as to escape the completed system burrows, one God universe, which prevents adventure or movement of any kind since God is already everywhere. Destiny or fate can thus be escaped by means of becoming tied to hyperstition, where fictions can become facts, virtually brought into being. Infinity in the form of past and future being a part of one eternal present, and a transcendent version of time take over. Heideggerian being towards death, much in the Zen Buddhist sense, begets rebirth, alchemic transformation or transmutation through putrefaction, emerging from out the lunar egg in occulted eclipse, obtaining nirvana and escaping the karmic wheel and reincarnation, likened, again, to the wheel of fortune as noted in the Trud and the zodiac, escaping the fate or destiny of the astrological stars, taking on Christian transcendental traits, proving to be a paradox, the infinite qualitative distinction of Kierkegaard, as backed by Karl Barth, escaping an anthropocentric version of God made by men as brought up by Feuerbach. The eternal circle is nipped and man slips outside through the spiral, where the cycle is linear enough to find a way forward, though a line of flight to the outside. Man speaks through metaphors, through the breath of his being, speaking spiritually and symbolically, magically manifesting meanings in his mind, conjuring demiurgic demons into creation for all his sinful flaws, seeking escape to the outside. To Wittgenstein, if a lion could speak, we could not understand him, since we do not come from the same context or culture of the lion. Thus, when we speak, since the meaning of our words come from different contexts, we misunderstand each other despite possibly believing otherwise. Like at Babel's towers, all these different speakers are talking about the same ideas, only from different perspectives. As Meister Eckhart stated himself, theologians may quarrel, but the mystics of the world speak the same language. Ultimately, the ideas, though conveyed differently through different technical terms, resonate the same fundamental idea. Get outside and create all from nothing, which is connected as one by eschatonic death and rebirth, a Promethean rebellion, so as to be reborn, escaping the controlled and cataconic fate of the stars and the prescribed destiny of the heavenly cosmos from when we came. As such, there was no real need retain all of my older writings, least of all nearly 400 videos. This one video should suffice as a suitable surrogate for all that are now none.